I realise that this story is by now a little old, and that it's already been covered by some more prominent YouTubers than myself, but I still think there were some things left unsaid, so here we go. There are few people in the world today still alive that I would say that I greatly admire. I'm impressed by people who have the courage to say something that they thought needed to be said, no matter how unpopular it might be, or how it may be twisted and distorted by opportunistic, agenda-driven charlatans for their own purpose. To me, Stephen Fry is one of those people. He was originally made known to me by his work as an actor, and later from his public and motivational speaking. He had some advice which gave me not only a great deal of comfort during one of the worst times of my life, but also, and more importantly, gave me the motivation and drive needed to improve my situation, and by so doing, greatly improve my happiness. Stephen Fry, I think, is now almost notorious for the cri de coeur he gave against the motion, "Is the Catholic Church a force for good?", mentioning in it things like the Church's exploitation of the poor, inventing concepts like purgatory, the damage caused by the Church's anti-contraception stance in AIDS-stricken nations, but in particular, Fry mentioned the massive, systematic rape of children by the priesthood and its subsequent cover-up by former Pope Joseph Ratzinger. I believe this speech has had more power in dismantling the former authority of the Catholic Church, particularly in regards to child molestation cases, than perhaps Stephen would admit. So, imagine my surprise then when I read a title like this.
No one would listen to Stephen Fry if he was poor. The actor sneers at child sex abuse victims and says free speech is being stifled, but he is part of the 1% who enjoy a platform. It's ordinary people who struggle to be heard.
This came from an opinion piece in The Guardian by Paris Lees, and at first glance seems like such a contrived character assassination that I wanted to go through the article in detail to show just how inaccurate it is. It seems to have been a response to another article in The Guardian, similarly misleadingly entitled,
Stephen Fry criticised for telling self-pitying abuse victims to grow up.
Both of these articles are based on Stephen Fry's comments in a YouTube interview video uploaded by the Rubin Report. Now, because my video converter has decided to shit itself, we just have the audio from this and not the picture, so I'm sorry about that. I'll put the links to the original in the description so everyone can see it, but I'm sure everyone's already seen it anyway.
Seriously, there is deep infantilism in the culture. And that extends, you can laugh at it, in terms of what people wear and what films they see, but in terms of the way they think, they can't bear complexity. The idea that things aren't easy to understand, that there's a but there's a ah. You have to think. There are gradations. And there are, that no one wants that. They want to be told, or they want to be able to decide and say, this is good. This is bad. I'm saying so. Anything that in any way conflicts with that is not to be borne. Yeah. And on student campuses, this idea of,
trigger warnings.
There are many great plays which contain rapes. And the word rape now is even considered a rape. To say the word rape is to rape.
Yeah.
Well, it has an interesting Latin root, and the word raptor comes from the same root, rapine, and there are all kinds of words from it. Violate, these words, they're terrible things, and they have to be thought about clearly. But if you say you can't watch this play, you can't watch Titus Andronicus, or you can't read it in a Shakespeare class, or you can't read Macbeth because it's got children being killed in it, and you might trigger something when you were young that upset you once because Uncle touched you in the nasty place. Well, I'm sorry. Yeah, it's a great shame, and we're all very sorry that Uncle touched you in that nasty place. But you get some of my sympathy, but your self-pity gets none of my sympathy, because self-pity is the ugliest emotion in humanity. And get rid of it, because no one's going to like you if you feel sorry for yourself. The irony is we'll feel sorry for you if you stop feeling sorry for yourself. Just grow up.
So, having watched that, let's read Miss Lee's response.
Free speech is under attack, and here comes Stephen Fry to defend it.
This is the only accurate sentence relating to Stephen Fry in the whole article.
Bemoaning the infantilizing culture of safe spaces and trigger warnings that has developed at universities in recent years, Fry launches into an extraordinary attack on victims of sexual abuse, saying, "It's a great shame and we're all very sorry that your uncle touched you in that nasty place. You get some of my sympathy, but your self-pity gets none of my sympathy."
That is extraordinary. We just watched the video and Fry did no such thing. How did this author come to believe this? After reading it, I had difficulty discerning whether the author had just become so upset that she could not comprehend what Stephen was saying, or had deliberately taken what he'd said out of context in order to misrepresent him. Then I remembered that this was a social justice warrior, and when one's motives are indistinguishable between malice and stupidity, with social justice warriors there's a third option: laziness. She probably didn't watch the interview. It's more likely she just read the Guardian article, felt a rush of self-righteous rage, and went from there. Stephen made no such attack. He was describing the crippling effect safe spaces and trigger warnings have had for any kind of intellectual development or education. I wondered if the author sort of realized this, because she writes the following.
Fry says it would be awful if people didn't read Titus Andronicus. Sorry, Stephen, I haven't. I went to a run-down comprehensive and read Romeo and Juliet for my GCSEs. I knew one person in my hometown who went to university.
Again, Fry did not say that. He said it would be awful if people didn't read things like Titus Andronicus because they contained potentially upsetting words and themes. There's a very important difference here. By writing this, I strongly suspect the author is attempting to sound underprivileged and hard done by, but really, she just sounds like a moron. I typed Titus Andronicus into Google and the second entry returned was the entire play, free to be read by anyone. Any of Shakespeare's works are now old enough to be considered Creative Commons, which means that anybody can publish them and anybody can read them without paying a royalty. This author could have read it, Romeo and Juliet, or any other of Shakespeare's works for free at any place that had the internet, or have just gone to a library. But she didn't. Instead, she chose to waste her time writing a vacuous, self-righteous diatribe in response to things Stephen did not say. Moving right along, our author writes this.
That he should use his right to free speech and his platform to express himself in this way is reprehensible.
What, in the way that you completely fabricated by misinterpreting what he said, or the way he criticizes hypersensitive, self-pitying social justice warriors like you?
It is also risible, for this is the same Fry who regularly flounces off Twitter because he doesn't want to hear people criticizing him over things he has said and done. Now he expects us to join in him in condemning people who have been affected by events they could not possibly control.
Again, Fry is not condemning people for being victims of abuse. He is condemning people for deliberately censoring everything, including great works of literature, just because they contain potentially upsetting words.
He is allowed to, of course, because of free speech, for in 2016 an absolutist interpretation of free speech has become popular among the chattering classes.
There is no other interpretation of free speech. It is either absolutely free or it is not free speech.
If only the overwhelmingly white, middle-class, Oxbridge-educated, male-dominated commentariat would take freedom from prejudice as seriously as it takes freedom of expression.
One isn't a human right. The other is. You have no right to be protected from prejudice, as that would directly impede everyone else's right to free speech. You don't have a right not to be offended. Having such a right is dangerous. As Stephen was trying to point out, you impoverish yourself of much of the world's information and knowledge by filtering it through the sieve of your hysterical emotional whims. Grow a spine. Get used to the idea that people might disagree with you, and that people might say things that offend or upset you. You will be a better person for it if you do. Expecting people to be aware of all the words and ideas that could potentially upset someone is an exercise in futility. Worse than that, it continually hampers people's expression because they are afraid of being harassed and called the worst things anybody can be called in a modern developed society. Words like misogynist and racist and homophobe and so on, by people so overtly sensitive because they are addicted to their own self-righteous anger. The author of this article manifests exactly what Stephen Fry was condemning in his interview for the Rubin Report. Self-pitying, self-righteous, social justice types who demand attention and sympathy for the bad things that have happened in their life, completely unaware of the fact that bad things happen in everybody's life, because most of us realize that most of the time our personal problems are not relevant to the things we're doing. We prefer to keep these things private and just get on with it. Would nobody really listen to Stephen Fry if he were poor? I don't think so. I don't think people listen to him because he's rich. He's just such an intelligent, erudite, and interesting guy. He has a great knowledge of history and literature. He has a love of the English language that is simply infectious. On top of all this, I think people listen to him because he just seems like an incredibly personable and friendly man. Compare all of this with you, Miss Lees. You're a social justice warrior. You are judgmental and irrational. You are intolerant of contrary ideas and views. You make a public spectacle of your personal problems in order to garner sympathy. If you didn't have your platform in The Guardian, you would still be able to voice your views on blogs, YouTube videos, Facebook notes, and whatever else without anybody stopping you. They're all free and available to anyone with an internet connection, which you seem to be privileged enough to have. But believe me, even if you were as rich as Stephen Fry, nobody would listen to you.